Great job on making it this far into the course. Shall we add some buttons? That's what we're going to do in this lesson. We're going to add in, and briefly in the last one, we saw that we can add page tokens, and page tokens represent the different pages. So you can go through all the different pages. So one page to the next page to the next page, and you can see the results are going to be changing. So you're going to have different results depending on what page you're on. And that's going to produce different results back from the API. And there's a lot of pages. So there's total pages. There's, what's that number? 1 million. Wow, a lot of pages that are being returned back. So a lot of videos with test. So let's create these buttons. And of course, this is JavaScript. So we're going to do this dynamically as possible. So creating a button, we can create button 1, or how about we give it a name where we can call next button, button next. So I can call this button next, document, create element. And the element that we're creating is a button. And so we want to be able to click this button, but by default, I want this button to have an attribute of disabled. So we'll select the button, button next, and set attribute. And the attribute that we're setting is going to be disabled. And we're setting that to a Boolean value of true. And then adding it into the page. So we'll do output, append child, and the child that we're going to append is the next button. So we've got our next button there. We should also put some text in there, of course. So next, and we'll give it text content. So there's our next button, and we'll do the same thing for previous. So we'll have two buttons, one next, one previous. So button previous, and button previous will also be disabled to be true. And also it will have actually different text. It's not going to be next, it'll be previous. And I'll update the order of these so that we have, by default, we have the previous and then we're going to have the next. So there we go. We've got previous and next. So I also want to add in some event listeners to these buttons where when we click the button, we want to initiate the search. And you can do that as well. So instead of just having query selector button, after we've created and added the buttons on the page, how about we call it buttons, BTNs, and update this to query selector all. So all of them can get the same event listener attached to it. So that means that, of course, we have to loop through buttons and then attach the event listener to the button. So have for each, and for each one of the buttons within that node list, we've got our item, or we can just call it button, and then adding in the event listener for button. So BTN, and this actually turns out to be the same thing. So BTN search. So that means that any button that gets clicked is going to be having the search function added to it. So search will still work the same way. There's no difference in how search is treated, but each one of these buttons as well is going to have that same event listener added to it because we've added it to all the elements that have button. Also, one other thing that I did want to update before we conclude this lesson and then work through adding in the next. We're going to do a second part to this lesson where we're going to add in the tokens into the object and then utilize that within the search. We're going to look for that within the search. So first thing that we wanted to do as well is we want to update that output because this doesn't look nice and neat anymore where we've got the buttons and technically they should be sitting beside the search button. So let's take a look at our code and you can see that we've got output down here or another element there that's going to have the previous and the next. So instead of adding it and appending it to output, I'm going to add the previous and next. And of course, you can style this probably a lot better afterwards, but this is just to have the buttons available and functional. So instead of adding it to output, I'm going to add it to document body, and we'll add this one as well to document body. So now when we do the search, the next and previous are at the bottom there. So that's ideal because if the user wants to move next, they'll go through all of these and go move next and previous if it is available. So coming up, we need to attach the tokens that we saw over here. We need to attach these different page tokens into previous and next and enable and disable them as needed. So that's coming up in the next lesson, part 2 to adding next and previous.